Hello, everyone. If you would indulge me for a moment and close your eyes and go way back to kindergarten, that first day, right before you walk into the classroom, the butterflies that you have in your stomach. And when the door opens, these kids are all strangers, but you're so excited to connect with them. Bring that spirit back right now and apply it to the rest of this conference. It could change everything. My name is Vika, and I talk to strangers. I make friends with strangers. I do it every day. Sometimes I get paid for it, sometimes I write about it, and I always do it because I'm genuinely, insatiably curious about the other experience. Frida Kahlo famously said, "Find a lover who looks at you like maybe you are magic." And I've taken that and thought, why don't we just find another and look at every stranger as if maybe they are magic? I started doing it since I could talk. Talking to strangers has been my modus operandi my entire life, and it's brought a lot of magic with it. From being a waitress to a Delta Happy Plane to an Oscar Mayer mascot to a writer to a backpacker, talking to people I don't know has deeply shaped who I am and how I move through the world. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say that talking to strangers has changed my life on every level, in every way. My Soviet mother saw this inside of me before even I did. She would often tell me stories about how, as a 2-year-old toddler, the second I learned how to talk, I was talking to everybody. We would go to the beach in the summer, and it was super crowded. People would actually save spots for me and my mom. And she was shocked about this because Russians are not known for their generosity of spirit, typically. But she said, "Vika, it was fascinating. You would just sit on their laps, they would feed you food, and then you would move to the next person, and you would talk and talk and talk all day long to strangers. You were not scared. As your mother, it was a nightmare." And this continued through childhood as I started traveling to visit my cousins in New York. Every time that I got off a flight, I had made friends with my seatmate, who promptly walked me through baggage claim into the arms of my mother, giving me and her a big hug and a business card. At first, I think she was a little shocked, and soon she came to accept her freak of nature, extroverted kid. In college, talking to strangers brought a whole lot of adventure into my life. I worked for this nonprofit called Blue Planet Run, and they were doing the first ever run circumnavigating the globe to raise funds for clean water to Africa. The first part of my job entailed finding 20 runners to do this run, which meant sifting through thousands and thousands of applications. This meant that I was on the phone for hundreds of hours, asking different questions that I came up with to understand who these people were at their core without ever having met them. The second part of my job entailed being on the ground. So I actually went to Poland, Belarus, Mongolia, Russia, China, Japan, and at every media activation station, as the director of Russian operations, I was responsible for managing this media circus and jumping in to do translations and radio and TV interviews. I also did a lot of street cam work, which meant jumping into strangers on the street and asking them questions about clean water. I felt so at home and alive. It was uncanny. Another job I had in college was very different. I was the Oscar Mayer hot dog, and in the middle of a miserable heat wave in July, had to stand at a BP gas station for 8 hours every Saturday, approaching strangers as they were pumping gas and giving them coupons. I just started having fun with it and making friends every time. And this one time, I saw a guy come out with a Four Seasons chef suit on. So I ran up to him and I said, "Hi, my name's Vika. I'm a student at Georgia Tech. I'm just doing this job because it pays well, but I'd really like to get into fine dining. Can you help?" And he looked at me and said, "Wow, you've got some nerve." But I appreciate the effort. So yeah, here's my card. The next day, I had an interview, and when I walked in, he didn't even recognize me. I had my hair blown out, in a suit and heels. He said, "Hot dog girl?" I didn't get the job because I didn't have 5 to 10 years of experience, but I got revenge by getting another job at the #1 restaurant in the city, Bacchanalia, for those who are Atlantans. I got that job because I decided to be really honest. I walked in, acknowledged that I had 0 experience, and when she asked me, "Why should I hire you?" I said the only thing that I knew to be true. I make friends really well with strangers. It was the first time that I recognized that it was a skill set and that it was abnormal. And true to form, I became a top waitress at that restaurant in the coming months and had the time of my life. Every night was a crash course in human psychology. I got to wait on celebrities, international businessmen, first dates, newlyweds, you name it. I got to connect with people from all different walks of life. And on one special night, I connected with a middle-aged couple from New York, Pat and Yonina. They were so sweet, and we talked about our love of travel. And so we swapped emails and stayed friends. 6 months later, I ended up meeting them in New York for a dinner, and these Sunday night dinners became our tradition. You see, Yonina was infertile. She was never able to have kids, and over the coming years, we formed a real familial friendship. She tragically died 5 years ago, and Pat has become an adopted father of mine, coming to every Thanksgiving and birthday and truly being part of the family. After waitressing, the economy crashed, so I bought a one-way ticket to Southeast Asia, and backpacking made me realize that talking to strangers was not just a freak talent I had, but it was really a way of life. And I talked to strangers every day. I made friends with these boisterous Irish boy banders, and we backpacked all through Thailand together. And once, when I was working at this orphanage in Cambodia, I contracted bacterial cellulitis. And it was the kindness of a stranger at breakfast who brought me to the hospital and helped me from getting my leg amputated. Backpacking made me feel at home with this human family, and it made me feel alive in ways that were impossible to go back to. And so I carried that backpacking spirit when I moved to New York. My sister suggested that I get into advertising, and soon I did. Most people may have felt intimidated by the idea of walking into a room full of millennials who are eager to get on their phone and don't want to hear your PowerPoint presentation. But for me, I just saw it as an extension of backpacking. Every time I walked through the doors of Coca-Cola or Comcast, I saw a group of kids at a hostel, and I started telling them about my travel stories, asking them about their hobbies, or just talking about the worst dating stories known to man. And we became friends. Before my laptop ever opened, there were these moments of real, authentic human connection. My bosses didn't understand it and chastised me, but the proof was in the pudding. Within a few short months, those clients became my friends, and my career took off. My business card soon read, "The Beyoncé of digital media," and that's when I knew I made it. And that's also when a client recommended that I start competing at this thing called the MOTH, which is a competitive storytelling program all over the world. The idea of getting on stage and talking to strangers about a true life story for 5 minutes was crazy to me. There was no way I was going to do it, and so I waited about a year and a half. And finally, in the midst of deep heartbreak, I showed up with a story about my estranged relationship with my dad, and unexpectedly broke down on stage in front of 300 strangers crying, only to pick myself back up again and walk off stage and have strangers coming up to me with warm embraces, hugging me. One man in his late 60s, with tears in his eyes, squeezed me tight and whispered that his dad had left him when he was a kid, and he never talked about it, but something I said deeply moved him. Another woman rushed up to me and told me she was a teacher at an underprivileged school in the Bronx, and she brought her students with her, a group of about a dozen beautiful girls. And they had also had tumultuous relationships with their fathers. And they asked me for a piece of advice. And so we went into the corner of this room and huddled together. And I shared with them what I wish I had taken myself, which was forgiveness is the key to their liberation. It was that night, in that moment, that I realized that it wasn't just talking to strangers that was the gift. It was sharing with strangers. That's the next highest gift. I ended up competing for the Moth a few more times and winning one night, which was unbelievably cool because it was the story of Yonina, of how I met a total stranger waitressing at a restaurant, and then she became part of my family. And in her passing, her husband became my adopted dad. Someone saw that YouTube clip a year later and reached out to me asking me to speak on stage for the first time. And so just as I was leaving my advertising career, this whole new career popped up where I realized that I could speak on stages around the world about my experiences to total strangers. I left at 28 to go backpacking because I wanted something more. And I realized that the only way to do that was to leave everything I knew and go into the unknown. So I started this blog called Year of Kind, and I documented acts of kindness with strangers around the world. One of my most moving experiences still stays with me. I was on a layover in New York, and I was walking through Flatiron, and an elderly woman limping asked me for help. She said, "Do you know where a Chinese restaurant is?" And I didn't, so I said, "Maybe the mall on 33rd. And as I walked a few blocks away, there was a bright orange sign. It was so weird that said Chinese restaurant. So I literally doubled back, ran to get her, asked her name, Francois, and suggested that we have dinner together. And so we sat as strangers, and over the course of the next hour became friends. And she told me all about how she grew up in Paris and was an artist, and now in her late 80s is alone in New York with no family. She had fallen earlier that day, so I ordered an Uber to pick her up, and it was this big, giant Suburban. And as I hoisted her inside the car and got in on the other side, the driver turned back and asked me, "Is this your family?" And I said, "No, but she's somebody's grandma, and I would hope that somebody would take care of my grandma if I wasn't there." It's not just in those moments that you realize how powerful human connection is. It's in the everyday minutia. Uber rides became a spiritual practice for me. Every time I got into an Uber, I just got deeply present and engaged to this miracle of a human that was in front of me. I started asking questions like, what have you learned about humanity? You've been doing this for thousands of hours. And that led to conversations about childhood dreams and wishes. And before we knew it, both of us were crying in the back seat. And I started sharing these stories on social media. And people really responded. They wrote me of their own tales, and the ripple effect of talking to strangers became very clear to me. But it wasn't just talking to strangers in Ubers. It was talking to strangers everywhere. And sometimes talking to strangers makes you find love in a hopeless place. I was just getting back from the Panamanian jungle and saw a dashingly handsome stranger at the airport and just wished he was at my gate. 10 minutes later, he was. And so I approached him, and we struck up conversation. And in under 11 minutes, we were making out in the terminal. It was awesome. And what was really crazy is I wasn't even supposed to be on that flight. I had volunteered off. But Frida's words came to me, "Find a lover who looks at you like you're magic." And so I ran up to the front desk and I said, "I know I volunteered off, but I'd like to volunteer back on." And they handed me my ticket, and I raced through the tarmac. And I said, "I'm coming, 15D." And he looked down at his ticket, and he was 15E. What are the chances? So we sat together the entire flight and ended up sharing dinner at our layover before going off to our respective cities and respective lives. And it was one of the most incredibly genuine romantic moments of my life. It's actually hilariously my most liked Medium post as well. And there's also this part about being with strangers that makes you feel deeply connected to your own humanity. After Burning Man one year, I saw someone speak about refugee camps, and so I bought a one-way ticket to go volunteer for a week outside of Sunnier, Greece. And When I arrived, this was really the human connection challenge of a lifetime. How do you connect to Syrian, Kurdish, and Afghani refugees who don't speak your language? You connect through the warmth of your eyes. You connect through playing with their kids. You connect by accepting invitations to sit in a room a quarter of the size of this stage with 12 members of their family sharing a meal. And you also connect by helping them. And so what we were able to do, this small team of volunteers and I, in 24 hours was raise $7,000 to bring immediate aid and supplies to 3 camps that the Red Cross had all of abandoned. It was one of the most exhausting and powerful weeks of my life. So what have I learned by talking to strangers? I've learned the power of human connection. I've learned that finding magic in the mundane is what life is all about. I've learned that if you listen, the universe leaves strangers in your path like little breadcrumbs. And if you follow them, those strangers will become your guides. The strangers that I've met have left an indelible impression upon me. The conversations marinate and linger for weeks and years later. And it doesn't matter that I'll never see them again. They're part of my human tapestry. Some of these strangers have become dear family, some of them have become dear friends, but all of them have become a part of me. And now I get to teach what I love. After hundreds of thousands of hours of talking to strangers, I speak on international stages about hacking human connection. I help people individually, teams, and companies connect to themselves so that they can connect to the world around them. Companies have flown me out for their retreats and summits and masterminds to speed connect a group of very different type A entrepreneurs through fun and joy and wonder and play. Because when we get to that place, that's where the real creativity and the real collaboration can happen. I also got really curious about modern manhood after my grandpa died. And so I started curating an underground men's dinner salon series all over the world, in every city I traveled to, from Berlin to Tel Aviv to New York to LA. I gathered men in small groups to talk about what it means to be a man. And it's totally changed the way that I show up as a woman and as a human. So we have this awesome responsibility of being human. We're all strangers in this game of life. And we have choices, micro choices that we make every day. Do I tell that person that their shoes are super cool at the coffee shop, or do I risk them giving me an adverse reaction? Do I talk to the stranger in the elevator, or do I risk total silence? Do I say hi to the person sitting next to me at this conference, or do I wonder forever what role that person could have played in my life? Because the fact is, this is a room full of friends. We're all zygote baby relationships waiting to be birthed. In this room could be your future business partner, your future lover, your future best friend, that future friend that you invite to next week's dinner party, that future friend that you end up inviting to your wedding years down the road that you're so grateful for your paths crossing, that future friend who holds your hand through a tragedy, that future friend who elevates and challenges and inspires you to be a better you. If we look at each other like the miracles that we are, if we accept that every single one of us is a library of stories and a treasure chest of wisdom, then we open ourselves up to the possibilities of magic happening every single day. And so I ask you, as we go into break today, as you wake up every morning, one question: how can talking to a stranger today change my life? Thank you.